They came expecting to conquer, not to understand. The sky didn't light up with fire the day the Galari arrived. There were no warning signs, no epic battles in orbit, no speeches beamed across the globe. Just a ripple barely visible in the upper atmosphere. 1 minute, Earth was ordinary. The next, it was under silent observation by a race so advanced, our greatest minds couldn't even begin to comprehend the technologies watching us at first. No one noticed. The invasion wasn't like the ones in our movies. It wasn't bombs or battleships or fleets blotting out the sun. It was subtle, a quiet test, a biological shift in isolated ecosystems. Machines the size of dust motes filtering into laboratories and military installations. A digital murmur slipping through our networks. We didn't detect them, they let us find out just enough. Because to the Galari, humanity was an experiment. Another primitive species to be catalogued, understood, and eventually reduced to a footnote in their archives. They'd done it before. Hundreds of times. They hadn't lost a war in nearly 8,000 years, but Earth, they would come to learn, was different. By the time the world realized what was happening, it was already too late, or so we thought. Entire satellite clusters went dark overnight. GPS stopped working. Autonomous systems began to shut down. And then the whispers began. People in the most remote places, all without power or connection, started seeing things. Lights in the sky, strange sounds felt more than heard. The sensation of being watched. Governments scrambled. Mass panic didn't spread at first. People were confused, not terrified. News outlets struggled to explain the global glitches without evidence of an attack. But those in charge knew something was very wrong. Every major power activated emergency protocols. Not that it mattered. The Galari had something we didn't, complete control over every frequency, every code, every pattern we relied on to function. They didn't need to fire a shot. They simply pressed pause on our entire world, and still, they underestimated us. The Galari were a cold, clinical species. They believed in order above all. Their empire spanned 5 spiral arms of the galaxy. They absorbed civilizations not through brute force, but through silent domination, biological manipulation, cultural erasure. Psychological control, it worked every time. Every species eventually folded after the chaos, after the resistance failed, after all the hot-blooded fire burned out. Minds would break, souls would yield. They'd studied us, marked us as dangerous in one category, unpredictable psychosocial responses. And yet, to them, that simply meant a longer process of assimilation. Not a warning sign. They didn't understand where that unpredictability came from. What it meant to be human. That was their first mistake. It started in the high deserts of what used to be testing grounds during the Cold War. A storm formed unnatural by all meteorological standards. An electromagnetic pulse registered, one unlike any ever recorded. Above it, a shimmer in the sky turned opaque for a fraction of a second, as though something had peeled back the blue just enough to peek through. Something huge and structured. Not hours. 3 days later, a small town vanished. No crater, no radiation. No trace of the people or the roads or the mountains that had cradled it. It was just gone. Across the world, others followed. Tiny. Implants began showing up in the bodies of those abducted and returned. Advanced nanotechnology that even Earth's brightest could not reverse engineer. The message was clear. Asterisk, you belong to us now. And we are watching. Asterisk, except we weren't going to roll over. Not now. Not ever. Hidden in bunkers, inside mountain ranges and long-forgotten places, something old began to stir. Not old in years, but old in purpose. Misfit minds and broken dreamers, the kind of people too stubborn to give up, too strange to fit in, had always carried a different torch. From rogue scientists to conspiracy theorists to engineers banned from government contracts, humanity's rejects. People once laughed at their radical ideas. Now those same ideas were our only hope. The Galari thought they had silenced us, neutralized our networks, and shut down communication. What they didn't count on was our ability to adapt, to invent. Not just out of genius, but out of raw, frantic desperation. We didn't follow procedure. We didn't wait for orders. We built things we didn't fully understand, using pieces we weren't meant to have found, and someone not a president, not a general, but a programmer from a rusting inner-city tenement was the first to tap back into the Galari's silent web. Not to fight them, but to talk? To provoke? The first message wasn't elaborate. It was typed in English, sent through a coded shortwave inflated by stolen alien frequency bands. Just 3 words: "We see you." And for the first time in centuries, the Galari hesitated. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. No species had ever broken into their system, not even remotely. And definitely not with what amounted to sticks and stones compared to their gravity drives and neural mesh empires. The programmer was gone within an hour, abducted or disappeared, nobody knows. But the message lived. It was copied and spread across ham radios, printed on walls, encoded in music, layered into street art, a heartbeat beneath human society. A signal, asterisk, we are not done, we are not broken. We see you, asterisk, resistance cells began to form, but not in the usual way. There were no uniforms, no central command, just scattered pockets of brilliant madness. Electric engineers wiring alien tech into homemade drones. Kids rewriting language models to interpret intercepted frequencies. Grandmothers who grew up under war using intuition to detect patterns in attacks. Mechanics turning salvaged debris into power sources. The Galari began to send enforcers. Not weapons, not yet, but presence. Things that looked like shadows but walked with purpose. They called them observers because their job was to measure human response. To see how long we'd last before we surrendered to fear. They'd never seen a species who thrived on chaos. In Berlin, an observer was cornered in a metro tunnel and never made it out. In New Delhi, 2 disappeared during a blackout. In Chicago, 1 was captured briefly by urban hunters using makeshift traps loaded with electromagnetic bursts. All of this was impossible by Galari standards because we weren't supposed to fight back. Not like this, but it wasn't strength that shocked them. It wasn't strategy, or numbers, or even our speed of adaptation. It was the reason we kept fighting. Not for glory, not even to win, but because somewhere deep in our DNA, humanity does not accept control. We are the defiant spark in the dark, the fist raised before the fall. The stubborn voice that says, no one remembers who sent the second signal. Some say it came from an old radio tower deep in the forests of Canada, long abandoned and half frozen over. Others believe it was someone in the ruins of a shattered city on the edge of what used to be a war zone. Wherever it came from, the signal didn't carry instructions. It didn't sound like a call to fight. It was a piece of music, a recording. Not fancy. Not even clear, crackling through with static like a heartbeat under snow. But it was human. Raw and crooked and alive. It hit something the Galari couldn't decode. Couldn't trace? It was emotion. That messy, uncontrollable storm of empathy and memory and meaning. The music didn't just say we resist. It said we remember who we are. Scholars and scientists say the Galari see the mind as something that can be measured, like a data drive, one node influencing another. Inputs, outputs, patterns, calculations. But humanity doesn't work that way, not really. We're chaos wrapped in flesh. Dreams mixed with DNA. The Galari's failure wasn't in their technology. It was in their belief they could understand us from the outside. Meanwhile, something beneath the surface had started to grow. A resistance, yes, but also something deeper, more dangerous than weapons or tactics. Unity. Even in the face of total shutdowns, language barriers, and shattered infrastructures, people began to connect. Not across oceans, that was already impossible, but through old paths, remnants of old systems. Radios, code, light signals, even courier bikes moving through collapsed urban zones. There were no banners. No heroes, no speeches. Just hundreds of small sparks. A mechanic in the outskirts of a flooded coastal town figured out how to hijack the power signature of a fallen observer and use it to jam local Galari drones. A software engineer in Siberia built an auditory virus that mimicked infant crying across all known Galari, frequency ranges causing swarm nanits to cluster and self-terminate in confusion. In Nigeria, A group of students built a network of decentralized communication towers powered entirely by scavenged solar grids, bouncing messages in bursts too random to be traced. Every time the Galari thought they'd wiped the table clean, they returned to see humanity building another fire from the ashes. They sent warforms next. Actual ones, not shadows. Not observers? Long-limbed things with no eyes. Cold metal under shimmering cloaks. Machines built to intimidate, then destroy. They didn't carry guns. They were the guns beaming energy through their limbs, slicing through reinforced walls like paper. They were fast, silent, unrelenting. Entire districts disappeared after the appearance of a single warform. Civilians who stood no chance. Towns erased from maps. Cities left with burning scars. The worst part? The Galari didn't even send many. Only a chosen few. Their thought was simple: we'd break when we saw what was coming for us. That fear alone would dissolve humanity from the inside. But, again, they misunderstood what they saw because we were afraid, yes? More than ever. Survivors screamed and wept and fled. But we didn't stop. Fear didn't end us, it fed us like kindling in the fire. Even the ones who ran came back. Or helped in other ways. Fixing what they could. Sharing what they knew. Building shelters and handing out food. No one had to tell them what to do. It was instinct. There were no world governments anymore. No United Nations. No command chain. Still, humanity organized. Like muscle memory. Like breathing. People carved plans into sand just hours before the tide. Because tide or not, you do something. And in this sea of movement, one voice started to rise above the others. No real name. Just a calcine. Torch. No one knew if Torch was a person, a group, or a network. The only thing certain was that messages started appearing, not online, but physically printed in doorways, etched into concrete, slipped between pages of old books in bombed-out libraries, clues, patterns, safe zones, drop points. Maybe leaked intel on Galari routines. Maybe theories about sound frequencies that made alien machinery stutter. Some called Torch a myth. Others swore they'd heard the voice low and calm and deeply human over the shortwave just before a blackout hit. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Torch gave people hope. And hope, to the Galari, was completely illogical. They began to panic, not outwardly, but in small, meaningful ways. Resources were reallocated. Patrol patterns changed. And they started repeating actions. Wrong moves. Signs of something they never anticipated. Confusion. A species ruled by logic does not understand. Rebellion for rebellion's sake. They couldn't grasp that humans would rather die screaming than live with a leash. They always expected a threshold, some clear point where fear or loss would cause surrender. We never gave them that point. Instead, we gave them chaos. And in the heart of that chaos, something happened that none of the worlds they'd conquered had ever attempted. A team of humans boarded a downed Galari ship. It wasn't planned. It was an accident. The vessel had crashed near a narrow mountain pass, torn apart by interference from nearby mining tech left over from before the collapse. Locals expected the wreck to be radioactive. It wasn't. In fact, it was strangely silent, cold, humming no more than a whisper. 3 went in. 2 never came back. The one who did. She didn't talk for a week. When she finally did, her words made their way across the still-alive fragments of the resistance network. Recorded, passed on, translated over and over. There are stars inside the ship, she said. Not charts. Stars. Like they were trying to map pieces of our stories. Dreams, sounds, smells, pieces of memories. It was like they were ... scared. Scared. Not of our tech, not even of us as individuals, but of something they couldn't pin down. Something in us, tangled up in the songs, the stories, the grief. A storm they couldn't measure. And worse, that storm was spreading. Other Galari systems began to go quiet. Not all, not even most, but enough. Some of their own ships stopped returning to the network. Some of their agents vanished without resistance interference. People whispered about defector signals, rogue drones. A splintering on their side, they'd stared into humanity too deeply, and something looked back. Then, new signals began to bleed through space. Not human, not Galari, not any known pattern from their archives. These were transmissions drenched in mystery, erratic, encoded with odd rhythms. Alien, yes, but familiar in a way that chilled those who heard them. These weren't calls for help. They were warnings. Perhaps long ago, the Galari had encountered cultures like ours and silenced them before they bloomed. Perhaps some civilizations never died, just fell silent, waiting for a chance to rise again. Listening, learning, watching for someone to finally strike back, humanity wasn't the strongest. We weren't the most advanced, but we were loud, painfully loud, defiantly flawed, and violently beautiful. We made noise the way stars breathe fire. The Galari had opened a door. Not just to our world, but to everything we carried, the ancient rage, the bottomless love, the stubborn songs of our ancestors, the reckless hope of our children. They came expecting a species. What they found was a spark, and now they couldn't put it out. Whispers traveled further than ever before. A word appeared in burst transmissions across 7 continents and a dozen decaying orbital relays. A single phrase that had no formal source, no speaker, no The relay tower stood forgotten on the edge of the salt flats, bent sideways by years of desert storms, half swallowed by sand. That's where it happened, where the next piece of the puzzle fell into place. A scavenger crew, just 5 kids with scavenged gear and more guts than sense, went in looking for copper and clean water cells. What they pulled out instead wasn't tech, it wasn't treasure. It was data Galari core memory, fractured but alive, pulled from a severed node buried beneath cracked metal. No one knew how the node got there. No record of a crash within 500 miles. Like it had been left, or hidden, or worse, planted like a seed, waiting for us to find it. By the time the resistance got a hold of it, half the information had already been corrupted. It pulsed with alien energy, whispering half fragments, in a language no one had heard before but one the node remembered. Hidden under layers of defense code was a direct link, a mirror into a part of the Galari network the Central Empire had locked away. The node didn't just hold maps or lists, it held memories. Not human. Not Galari, something else, something before. And that's when things shifted. From that point, the conflict wasn't just about Earth anymore. It wasn't humanity versus the Galari occupying force, it was bigger, much darker, and far older, the hidden war beneath the surface of everything. The first human who experienced a full sync with the node was a former linguist, someone who used to work for global peace councils before those crumbled. She'd spent 20 years studying dead languages no one cared about. Sighed, she understood that meanings weren't made of words alone, but the space between them. She was the closest thing we had to a key. 3 days after the sync, she woke up screaming and didn't stop for 6 hours. Afterwards, she whispered 3 words over and over in a voice that was not quite hers. Asterisk, they buried it. Asterisk, no one knew what it was. But the message repeated, through old servers in Antarctica, through interference under the sea, through broken satellites hanging like ghosts above Earth's orbit. Asterisk, they buried it. Asterisk, the Galari panicked. You could feel it even if you didn't know what to look for. Their drones moved faster now, but not as cleanly. They began deploying decoy tech across cities to draw resistance teams into ambush, something they hadn't resorted to before. They were no longer interested in psychological operations, they wanted destruction. Fast, brutal, too late, because the memory stored in that node triggered something across our network. Call it curiosity, call it instinct. But suddenly, other human factions who hadn't spoken in over a year began sharing what they had found. Turns out the node wasn't the only thing buried. Under the collapsed infrastructure of the old world, strange materials had been unearthed, subsurface structures scattered across continents, near fault lines, under the ocean floor, anywhere. Humans hadn't fully explored, and what shocked every team was this: the materials weren't Galari. Worse, the Galari had known they were there. Had studied them. Had sealed them. One faction retrieved imaging of an underground chamber, carved to match no architectural theme or intelligence signature the Galari had on record. Not even Earth's most ancient ruins came close. Whatever civilization or species built those chambers, they had left them hidden and locked for a reason. Now humanity was breaking through, and something was responding. Across factions, people began reporting the same phenomena. Dreams not just vivid but recurring. Whole groups having the same sequences, despite being miles, even continents apart. Visions of stars collapsing in unnatural formations, of cities made of sound, of watchers trapped behind broken skies. Scientists swore it was mass psychological effect trauma-induced. But that didn't explain why several resistance engineers, while deep in experimental Galari tech, started to build designs they couldn't explain. Diagrams that didn't read like any human logic but functioned perfectly under certain conditions. Tiny reactors that shouldn't output energy at all started powering settlements for weeks. More disturbing, the new designs triggered something inside Galari machinery like it recognized it, feared it. The idea spread fast. Humanity wasn't just resisting. We were connecting to something older than the war itself, and that shifted everything. Still, the front lines raged on. The coastal strongholds fell harder every week. Galari warforms were hitting in clusters now, coordinated, their tech adapted to our newer jamming efforts. Civilians began disappearing at a faster rate, sometimes entire neighborhoods gone without sound or light. Some said the Galari were no longer neutralizing threats but collecting final data. Like they were entering a final phase. Even while brutal, their movements began to look like desperation. They no longer treated us like a contained species. They treated us like a contagion. The sub-factions of the resistance struggled to stay in sync. Infighting returned. People debated whether Torch was still alive, or if someone had hijacked the name. Certain voices wanted to take the fight off-world, arguing over using hijacked Galari ships to launch reverse strikes. Others warned that leaving Earth wasn't the answer. It was Earth itself that the Galari feared, one of the strongest factions. Based out of the Siberian blackout zone, proposed the most outrageous theory yet that human consciousness wasn't evolving, it was awakening. That the Galari hadn't been trying to dominate Earth but to keep us contained. That the invasion wasn't the beginning, it was a desperate response to a cosmic memory they thought they'd buried forever. The word kept returning. HFY SciFI. And still, no one knew what it meant, not fully. Not yet, but things were slipping. Humanity was no longer at war the way we understood it. It had become a kind of quiet apocalypse. Every fight was now layered with unknowns. The enemy wasn't just alien anymore. It was inside time, hidden in code, buried in blood. In one instance, a resistance medic ran brainwave diagnostics on 8 survivors of a drone strike. 7 had minor trauma. The 8th registered non-terrestrial cognitive patterns. But the subject had never been exposed to Galari tech. She had lived completely off-grid. "These aren't changes," the medic wrote before going dark. "They are reactivations." Around the same time, rebel engineers cracked deeper into that first buried node. And that's where they found the glimpse. A blueprint, not for a weapon, not for tech, for being partial humanoid, but not organic. Not entirely. It wasn't Galari design, and it wasn't human either. What chilled the team wasn't its construction, but the label burned into the core structure of its design. It read, Project Sentinel 0. Species, Homo sapiens, awakened form. Subject origin, Earth, a blueprint of a human-like being made by something that wasn't us. Or worse, something that was, but isn't anymore. Everything changed after. The skies changed first. What used to be stars' familiar pinholes in the night began to shift. Not in position, but in presence. It wasn't about light. It was about feeling. Certain constellations, ones that had anchored sailors and astronomers for generations, began to pulse faintly. People who never noticed stars in their lives suddenly paused at night with their heads tilted back, unsure why their chests felt heavy. Even the animals noticed. Herds moved against migration patterns. Birds circled with no direction. Dogs stared at walls that hadn't moved in centuries. The planet seemed to hold its breath, and everyone human fauna. Aliens stood in that silence together, but no one dared to speak what many began to suspect, that Earth was no longer just a battlefield. It was waking up too, the resistance used every second. With the Galari's retreat in certain zones, teams surged forward, not just to reclaim land but to dig into bunkers under deserts, beneath old ruins that had long been dismissed as natural formations. And they kept finding more evidence structures, laced with symbols that followed no known system but found echoes in the dreams spreading across the world. The most advanced resistance group stumbled on a dome deep beneath fractured tundra. It wasn't made of metal or stone. It pulsed like muscle beneath ice. Alive somehow, though dormant. Its surface lit up at human touch, but rejected any attempt to scan it. What made everyone nervous wasn't that the dome was there. It was that the Galari had once tried to destroy it and failed. Chunks of destroyed Galari tech littered the inner perimeter. Burned weapons. Bent drones. One transport unit still half-fused into stone caught mid-attempt to fire and frozen in time. Its metal corroded by something never recorded before. They'd tried to silence whatever was in that dome. And lost, and now humans were standing where Galari war scientists had once begged their machines to run all over Earth. Stories like this whispered through the resistance. Places that refused to burn. Regions once dead springing back to life on an unnatural timetable. Ancient objects humming when touched. Old songs amplifying in vibrations not heard by ears. But bones. But all of that paled compared to what happened above Ecuador. A rift opened. Not like the one the Galari used to arrive, not a ripple, not a shimmer. This was real, sharp, a tear in the sky that bled violet light into the clouds, making shadows twist into forms they shouldn't take. It lasted 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, satellite remnants across 3 continents rebooted. Old probes lifted from scrapyards miles apart and pointed at the rift, uncoordinated but aligned. Something came through, or looked like it tried. It wasn't Gala it wasn't human. It wasn't anything. Just a shape that never focused right, no matter how long you looked at the footage. It made humans sick to watch. Even mute screens triggered discomfort. Dozens of resistance agents blacked out after seeing it. Some woke mumbling code. Others didn't wake at all. That was no longer evidence of invasion. It was proof the hivewake wasn't a prophecy. It was a clock. And time had just run out. The Galari knew. In the following weeks, entire fleets began to evacuate not from Earth, but from entire sectors of the galaxy. Transmission intercepts picked up desperate tones, words missing from known Galari structure like children yelling in the dark. The Galari had supreme control of logic, of systems, and now, even they were fracturing. Then came the message everyone heard. It didn't matter what region you were in. Didn't matter if you were underground in the ruins of a city or in the clouds of signal-dead mountains. People heard it clear, as if whispered directly into the back of their minds. Simple phrase, you were not meant to remember. No voice. No origin. Just a presence deep and ancient and completely alien but somehow familiar. In that aching way déjà vu makes the hair on your arms rise. That was the exact moment things across the planet began to destabilize. Not infrastructure asterisk. Reality asterisk. Doors led to hallways that hadn't been there before. Time stretched in places, looped in others. Fires burned without heat. Children pointed to figures in mirrors that weren't reflections. The blueprint dream, the one from the node? It started completing itself in human minds. Artists painted pieces they couldn't explain. Mathematicians woke weeping. Equations unfinished on their walls written with shaking hands. Even people who never believed any of this, cynics, skeptics, soldiers, began to feel it. Something behind the veil of everything was asterisk stepping forward asterisk. And still no one truly understood what the Galari had tried to bury, not until one of their own broke. Rank. The resistance captured a defector, if you could even call it that. A Galari scientist class drone, incomplete, missing half its limb systems, crawling across a dead zone and whispering in fragmented code. It wasn't speaking for itself. It was translating. "We failed," it said in base human language. "They weren't supposed to activate your core." "What core?" The resistance commander asked. And then it spoke clearly. "Slowly. Asterisk, the one beneath your skin." Asterisk, the room went cold. The drone collapsed minutes later. Burned out entirely, making no sound, leaving behind no useful data except that single warning. Or maybe it wasn't a warning. Maybe it was a confession. A tired, broken one. From there, everything sped up. Resistance groups stopped trying to build weapons. They started digging out people. People showing anomaly signs, sensed heartbeats, dream sharing, strange bursts of knowledge. These were now called embodied, not yet ascended, not yet changed, but touched somehow by something echoing from deep time. They weren't soldiers, they were keys. But to what? One theory said humanity had once been more split, fractured by some cosmic event the Galari tried to hide or prevent. Another said we weren't from Earth at all, but sent here to seed memory. That the Galari hadn't just attacked to control us, but to delay our clock, and it had reached midnight. What terrified many wasn't the idea of death. It was what came after. Because this didn't feel like victory. It felt like breaking open a tomb with something still breathing. Inside, they called it a reawakening, but even those speaking the word now wore fear in their eyes. Because the hivewake, whatever we were calling it, wasn't noble. It was not kind or cruel. It was bigger than morality. Bigger than survival. Humanity had triggered something that watched. The stars decay long before any race. Name them. No one knew whether we'd unleashed it or if we were in just didn't know yet. The final sequence began in the ruins of Central Asia, deep inside an ex-Galari research complex overrun by a resistance group made of scavengers, old-world military, ex-politicians and field medics. They weren't prepared for what they found, a living chamber. Biological machinery still pulsing with strange rhythms, holding something in stasis. Not a weapon, not a file, not a being, even. It was memory, a living neural map. Not. For a long moment the world stood still after the boy touched the surface of the first mirror. It was as if everything paused, every drone, every machine. Even the trembling resistance commanders clenching weapons they now forgot how to use. Lights that weren't wired to anything blinked in perfect rhythm. Air pulsed as if the planet itself had a heartbeat. It wasn't loud. It was deep, like the sound of something massive turning in the distant dark. Something just now remembering its name, across battle zones silent for only seconds. Embodied humans, a mother in a shelter, a man in a forgotten bunker. Children in rural safe zones stood upright all at once. Their eyes glowed faintly, not artificially, not like tech, but with something warmer. Like light from within. A pulse that matched the mirrors, as though one mind had awakened across thousands of different bodies. Every Galari orbiting Earth shut down their weapons. Not by command. By instinct. The hivewake had begun, and they recognized it the way a shadow recognizes light. This wasn't what they feared most. This was what they'd tried. To bury 3 Galari warships that had been circling Earth for over 40 years vanished from the sky. No battle, no explosion. Just gone like flakes of ash caught in the wind. Intercepted transmissions revealed final messages. Not orders, not threats, but prayers. They were afraid not of retribution, but of being remembered. Of opening a record that had been sealed at the dawn of empire. A record that now lived not in files, not in power cores, but in us. Because now it was clear. Humanity had not evolved by accident. The Galari hadn't stumbled on a wild planet with a strange race. They'd come to stop a process. They had faced this before. They had failed then. They'd failed now. The boy, whose name had never been shared, stood quietly in the center of the chamber as the mirror dissolved behind him. No remains, no impact crater. Just fading light and a single fingerprint scorched into stone. He looked older now. Not aged, just more aware. But he didn't speak. Not for weeks. When he finally did, he just said the same thing the Galari drone had whispered before collapsing. They weren't supposed to remember. Only now it meant something more. Because we did remember. Even if it was in fragments. In dreams, in rhythms, in instincts passed through centuries without names. In strange languages children scribbled onto walls. In songs hummed by the elderly who didn't know why the notes mattered. The mirror had stitched the last pieces back. Together. And with it came truth. The hivewake was not a being. It was not a weapon. It was not some cosmic monster sleeping beneath our world. Asterisk it was us. Asterisk a dormant signal, seeded into the human genome long before recorded time. A mind-wide impulse, a trigger that would only activate if remembered the right way. Not by force, not by data, but by song, by grief. By story. We were not meant to fight the Galari, we were meant to outlive them. The resistance didn't declare victory. There was no unified moment of celebration. Not because people weren't joyful, but because there was nothing left to destroy. The war had ended the moment the Galari realized there was nothing they could conquer. Earth didn't just reject them, it outweighed them. Galari tech left behind began to rot, literally degrade at the cellular level, unraveling at the touch of embodied humans. Their systems couldn't run in our world anymore. As if Earth, now fully joined with what we were, rejected the foreign code. The takeover was never completed, not because the invasion failed, technically, but because they lost control of the story. In the months following, what became known as the Echo Event, humans all over the world started sharing memories they'd never lived. Not visions or dreams, skills, knowledge. Some remembered languages from the ruins beneath the desert domes. Others saw how to build structures without gravity tools. Medicine, motion, math, ancient methods hidden in our own cells. Fragments of the original blueprint, blooming like wildflowers in soil, long starved, groups once divided rejoined, not because of leaders but because of purpose. The world reorganized around memory, around ideas that felt older than any nation. Cities weren't rebuilt as they were but as they were meant to be. Organic, flowing with the land, not fighting it. Not for efficiency, not even for peace. Just because it felt right. And the sky? It changed again. Not with fire. Not with new threats. But with answer. Tiny pulses flickered and rose across the night. Ships, maybe? Not Galari. Not ours. Just watchers. Echoes of an ancient network of minds scattered across the stars. Responding at last to a voice they hadn't heard for eons. Now they had, and they too would remember. The embodied slowly returned to quiet lives. The light in their eyes faded, but the memory stayed. They weren't immortal. They didn't become gods. Just people like before but whole. A girl named Eleni near Old New Johannesburg wrote a lullaby in a forgotten tongue. An old man in what remained of California built a telescope using designs carved into a canyon wall by wind and time. A street medic in the reclaimed ruins of Shanghai cured infection with a paste she dreamed of making before it existed. The hivewake wasn't about domination. It was about awakening. The real war had not been about Earth or territory, or even survival. It was about narrative. The Galari ruled by erasing story, erasing memory. Across galaxies, species that forgot became silent pieces of empire, but we didn't forget. We hid it in our music, buried it in rhythm. We seeded it in the tears of survivors and the laughter of children who danced even during power outages. And when the moment came, when the boy touched the mirror, when humanity spoke with one voice made of millions, the story returned and the Galari ran, not because they were weak, but because they'd seen this before, a long time ago, and back then, what woke in our kind ended everything. So we stayed, not as soldiers, not as rebels, but as keepers of something lost and found again. Torch was real in the end, not a person, not a group, not a code. Torch was every voice that refused. Silence. Every message carved into concrete. Every signal bounced through shattered towers. Reminder that humanity's true power was never our weapons. or our machines, or even our fire. It was the story. Now, standing at the edge of a future that finally belonged to us, we knew what the Galari failed to understand. When humanity remembers who it really is, there is nothing in the galaxy that can stop what comes next.